Hi, this is LKelly, and I did my action research on task-based speaking practice in the foreign language classroom. I teach at Sandwich High School, and I teach Spanish 3, and it's a homogenous classroom with special ed students through what would be honors level students all in one room. The most important name in modern theory when it comes to learning a second language is David Krashen. The old school method of learning, which probably accounts for most of our foreign language experiences in school, was very much the old school sage on a stage. I know everything. I'm going to teach you what I know when it comes to grammar rules and vocab and things like that. A lot of students producing things written or otherwise, and teacher correcting it and stuff like that. That's really what most of our textbooks look like, and what most schools' curriculums look like as well. So Krashen really wanted to contrast that with what he called language acquisition, which really is kind of more natural, and he compares it to learning a language as a child learning your first language. So you don't teach grammar, you are given communicative tasks, and that drives your growth. So you're kind of learning how to use the structure of the language in order to create meaning, rather than just learning grammar and then learning kind of what you need it for later. So most of our state and national standards are based on his theories, more of like the growth mindset kind of thing. But there's a disconnect between most curricula and then the modern accepted theory. So a lot of teachers in particular are hesitant to embrace the newer theory because it's harder. Basically, it's pretty cut and dry and measurable and easy to report to parents on sort of whether a kid has mastered grammar or a vocabulary list or something like that. Whereas when you're trying to do things with growth, it can be hard to monitor and keep students on task with things. Accuracy becomes a much grayer area, which a lot of teachers aren't comfortable with. It's can be difficult to create stuff because this kind of curriculum doesn't really exist for foreign language, where it might for reading and writing and things like that in a first language, like an English classroom. And it can be hard to evaluate and report and grade and things like that. And it's hard to identify where gaps are, again, because these things don't really exist. Companies aren't making things to really help you that much with this stuff. So what I decided to do was try to kind of do some little things and see what the impact is. So I decided to use a lot of speaking activities that are using this task-oriented theory that Krashen puts out for acquisition, rather than teaching the grammar vocab. I'm still doing the regular curriculum as well, but I wanted to see if doing these task-oriented things had a positive impact on student learning. So I already was doing a little bit of this, but for my intervention group, I tripled the frequency of these L2, meaning like your second language speaking practice. And I differentiated them for the learners that are in my room from kids on IEPs on up, and kept them short and kept them focused in order to try to limit some of those sort of variables, the number of variables anyway, that would be difficult to track, and part of what makes this so challenging. So what I came up with for a model, and you'll see an example in a minute, is these really pretty short structured conversations. We do modeling of them first, so that students see what they should look like. Then I have them do a dry run, I call it, where they can sort of talk about it in English as they're doing it and figure out if they're doing it right. And then I have some groups share out as like, here's what our little conversation sounded like. Students who are comfortable with it at first. Then we repeat the same conversation many times That's intentional. There is a variable in there, as you'll see, and with a lot of different partners, so they're coming from all different ability levels. And I randomly pick groups to share out and sort of perform their little dialogue. And everybody needs to keep a written log of each time they talk to somebody, here's what our conversation was about. And that's in Spanish as well, and you'll see an example. So this is what the students get from me. And again, this is the sort of like task-oriented part. Like I'm telling them what to do, but not necessarily exactly how to do it. So this is a conversation that is probably mid to early in a unit where they're talking about classes. They've already had in the early like Spanish 1 a education-focused unit where they learn words like matemáticas and literatura and stuff like that, which are cognates, right? Math and literature, and just really names of classes and words like difficult and study and things like that. This is a lot more in depth in a lot of different ways, like in terms of the types of classes they're learning to say very specific classes. So not just like history, but like world history, U.S. history, and also talk about like why a class might be difficult, or talk about teaching styles and how things like that. So really trying to get them to be able to explain their own educational experiences to someone else. And they've done some stuff before this, so they're more familiar with vocabulary, so they know a lot of the classes. And they also, here, they're going to like complain about a class, basically. So they've done a lot of work to sort of, and that's what they're doing anyway in English all the time, is moaning about classes. So figured kind of why not just have them do this in Spanish, right? So they've done a bunch of that before in isolation. And then also here, this is going to be more like saying something positive. Down here is where they're going to say something positive about the class. So they've played around with that vocab already. And we talk about it as a class, or sometimes they talk about it individually and try to come up with ways to do these things. But then we kind of narrow it down as a group, so they have some ownership of this. This is what a lower level kids is going to look like to set it up. This is going to be the same every single time, the stuff that you see in Spanish on here. So sometimes it's just a stock response, which they're just going to say the same thing over and over again. And really, I just want them to memorize like that. This is how you say, okay. And this is how you ask, why not? Things like that. Here, these ones with asterisks are the ones where they kind of need to be creative. They're going to have other things in front of them that they can use for support that will have sort of like negative vocabulary for saying negative things and phrases for saying why things are good or helpful. And then an upper level kid might not be obvious at first glance, but they have longer responses, but they're also just more qualified, and they give more detail, and there's a lot more transition type words like however and also and things like that. And the stock replies that are saying like okay, I have them use different ones, and kind of we give a few different options, and they change things up more. There are more moving parts for the higher level kids. Oops. And then this is where they're sort of like recording their answers. So they talk about a class, why they complain about it, and the other guy says, but it's important or something. And so they have to record like a single sentence at the end about the class, why it's might not be appetizing, and then why it actually could be good or helpful. All right, and obviously I can't get around and hear every single kid as they are going through this. Or in every single conversation, but I can follow up on this and see if they're using a variety of things. Also, as they're going through and having these little dialogues with many different partners, I randomly ask groups to share out. And the other goal that as we go through it and they have this conversation 3, 5, 7, 8 times, is that they stop looking at the paper as much, and we talk about this as we go through. Okay, try to not look at it for those parts that are repeated every time, and hopefully it becomes more internalized, and they just start associating sort of task, like say, agree with somebody, and word, rather than like definition in English and Word. So as I did a lot more of that in class, I kept track of basic vocabulary quizzes, which were mostly images, label them. Written assignments, which were mostly kind of like, tell someone about classes that you don't like. So they're still kind of task oriented. And then on oral proficiency assessments, which mostly are groups that are associated by level, and they have to have a little dialogue about an improvised dialogue about the topic at hand. So if you compare the control group and the intervention group, across the board pretty much saw growth. There are a couple outliers here. You can see the intervention group is lower, but for the most part, saw improvement. So Krashen and this other guy, Ellis, who's the other major name in foreign language learning, both say that motivation and aptitude are huge factors. We all know that's true across all kinds of learning, and we are constantly challenged to sort of try to mitigate those factors. But the leading experts say there's nothing you can do about motivation and aptitude when it comes to foreign language learning or acquisition, whatever word you want to use. So I used kind of like their criteria to divide my kids up into high, mid, and low achieving. This was an afterthought after I had done this, just to kind of see if there was a difference in growth. And the middle kind of regular CP type kids showed the most growth, which really doesn't surprise me because that's probably who I'm really designing things for, consciously or not. My low kids did show a good amount of growth, could be better. I'm not really surprised, but I'm disappointed that I'm not pushing my highest achievers as well with this stuff, which that's it. Kind of talk about that more in my future study stuff. Just another little side look at at a specific piece of data or set of data was that the oral proficiency scores for my control group were kind of all over the place, while the intervention group was a kind of steady increase. So, it's a small sample set, but over time could be interesting. So I think it would be interesting to see if some more intentional ability grouping would make a difference to the highs and lows. Really got to push those high achievers. And if the other types of task-based activities, like I don't do a lot of written task-based practice, if that could also make a difference. And the other giant in the field is this guy, Rod Ellis, who really wants to still teach explicit grammar lessons, but he wants to do a lot of task-based stuff as well, kind of combining the two things. And I kind of agree with him there. I'm going to apply for department head in my school next year. And we don't really do a lot of the task-based. And I hope this will kind of back me up. And this research that I've found and done myself will back me up in my sort of reasoning why I want to bring some of this stuff in. And I just want to say thanks to Ed for teaching me how to screencast. And no, in all seriousness, just want to say thanks a lot to Stacy for guiding me and all of us through this project. And I want to say thanks to everybody in the class. It really has been fantastic to be in a room with you guys and hear, smart people who work hard talk about great things that they're trying to do and trying to make their classrooms a meaningful place. And I really appreciated being around you guys through the courses we've done together. So thanks a lot.